Hello there, everyone. It's Kristi, and welcome to another episode of Feminist Talk Back, a series that had to be put on hold while I was in the UK doing data collection during the 2017 snap election. But I am back, and I'm back with my guest here. We're going to be talking today about his research into political representation in Canada, in particular. Now, this is an interesting topic for me because obviously I'm interested in the nexus between gender and politics, but because I deal with voting behavior. I don't really talk too much about what happens when men and women get elected into office or the background for that. And so Tim is, because he's done some original research on that, is very kindly agreed to come on to the show and explain his background with this, how he found the topic, found it interesting, and what his results were. Now, this is from an earlier research. There's been a couple elections, but I think for the historical purposes, it will be very interesting show. And so, Tim, thanks so much for being on.
Sure, my pleasure, Kristi.
Yeah. So I'm gonna do I did a lot of the talking now, but it's gonna be your turn to do most of the talking for the rest of the show because we want to hear about what you learned in the course of your research. But before we start, why don't you just tell a little bit of, don't dox yourself or anything, anything you don't want to share, but a little bit of a background in terms of how you ended up on the program you did and why you found this topic interesting.
Sure. I do a lot of watching and videos in the feminist community and the, I guess if you want to call it the SJW, anti-SJW community as well. I watch Kevin Logan, Dick Coughlin, Garnett, yourself, Kristi, a lot, and several others as well. And I've always been interested in feminism since I was probably in my teenage years. I had heard about it in school, in a politics class, and I learned more about it as I went through university. And then when I got to grad school, I had decided to do a project involving feminism. I didn't know it was going to be about female candidates and political parties at that time. It just sort of evolved into that. So I guess I can start with the story of how I came to study this topic. Around about 2007, I had been taking a course at the University of Western Ontario in a city called London in Canada, with a river running through it called the Thames. So it's kind of an exact copy of the city in England. That shows you the unoriginality of a lot of the names in North America, but that's a different topic, I guess. But I was taking a class and we titled Women in Politics, and I had a professor who was very feminist, and she had really influenced me on my look on things. Before that, I had not really considered myself feminist, but then after that I did. And she had a lot of experience. She's an academic that studied feminism. She gave me she gave myself in the class a lot of background about the different subsets of feminism, like radical feminism, environmental, conservative, intersectional. There's lots of them, as I'm sure everybody knows. And she had two books in that class that I basically formed a lot of my thesis around, by Linda Trimble and Jane Ascott was one. And then, sorry, Kristi, I just need to go to my bibliography for a second, pardon me.
Yeah, no worries at all. Wow, I'm really impressed that you're pulling up your bibliography for a spontaneous chat. I just go, the name is something like this, and I'll figure it out later. So
yeah, sorry, I just don't want to. I want to give credit to those women because I really use their work a lot.
That's great, of course. And if you have any links that you want to give me afterwards, I can put them in the description box, or people can just use the Google machine.
Sure. So. Okay, so
you find it?
Yeah, it was Linda Trimble and Jane Arscott, I believe is how you say it. It's called Still Counting Women in Politics Across Canada, and it was published in 2003. And that book is mostly a study of just women in politics in general, and a lot of different aspects, not just candidates and political parties. They kind of go through the history of the women's movement in Canada, which I had mentioned in the introduction that to the thesis is somewhat different from other ones in other countries. It wasn't quite as militant. They didn't result. They more like petitions and things like that. Non-violent resistance. I guess before Mandela or before Gandhi kind of thing. And they achieved women in Canada achieved voting rights about the same time as I think American and British women around like 1918, 1920. There was some lag and some normal parts. In Quebec, I guess people think Quebec is very progressive nowadays. That's the image people get of that part of Canada because it's French or just because of their cosmopolitan outlook on things. But before the 60s, Quebec was a very conservative place because the Catholic Church had a lot of influence over the province's governance, and women didn't get the vote until 1940 as a consequence. So you can see that there was a lag there in Quebec, somewhat. And then also in my home province of New Brunswick, there was women got the vote in like 1921, but they couldn't run for office until 1934. So those were like the notable lags. So once I finished with that course in May of 2007, I was applying to grad schools because I'd finished my I'd already finished my bachelor's before that because I went to the University of Brunswick, and then I had gone to London, the University of Western Ontario, to do a few courses just to figure out what I wanted to do for graduate school. And then I ended up in Bergen. It's kind of a funny story because I actually know more about like international relations and geopolitics and that kind of stuff, but this kind of came up and I thought it would be interesting because I had a prior thing with the University of Bergen. I had gone there in 2004 as a study exchange because the University of Brunswick and Bergen have a exchange agreement. So I spent 6 months there. So when I noticed they had a good program with public policy, I went there. And also it was the best place I got into, so that might have influenced my decision as well. So
yeah, you only get one degree, you know, so from when some people go on.
Right, yeah, and
but you want the best school you can get into, basically.
Yeah, so I went there in August of 2007, and then so the first year of the program is courses, and because it was a two-year master program. Which is kind of against the norm in Norway, at least, because they usually have they have 5-year ones where people will they only do a master's. They don't do a bachelor's first. They just do a straight 5-year master. And that was a lot of people that I met when I was there and doing that. And they kind of thought it was kind of weird because it stuck out among their other their other master programs. And so they taught us the first year was research methodology and field work and stuff like that, and we were generating the topics in the first part of 2008, and then after May of 2008 we were supposed to go on our own and choose a supervisor and then go do our field work or to start writing or whatever methodology we had chosen, quantitative or qualitative, just go off and be independent somewhat. Besides, checking with supervisor here and there. So at first I was going to do like interviews and surveys as my way to collect data.
Sorry, just to stop you there. So just for people who, talk about the social sciences being soft and not rigorous, a little bit, you were taught scientific thinking and the idea of empiricism, the importance of data, the importance of observation, the role of theory in explaining, creating a causal link between observation and forces at work. You were taught about the difference between qualitative data and the kind of inferences you can draw from that versus survey data, which is drawn to be representative of a population, so you can generalize. So you were taught the methods of thinking in a rigorous scientific way that includes, for this quant side, falsification from hypotheses, and from the qual sides, an inductive way of creating theories to account for things that we don't have theories for, or to expand theories, or investigate theories. I'm kind of giving you, it's a very softball answer. I'm very much begging the question, but I just want to kind of get out there that when students go through a social science degree, it's not all about interpretivism and just forming an opinion and saying things. There's a rigor there that we have to adhere to in order to go through and make it past the peer review process to get published in social science journals.
Right. Yes, and it was a pretty rigorous education they gave us. They used a book by Gary King and Robert O. Keohane and Sidney Averba, which is called The Design of Social Inquiry, Scientific Inference and Qualitative Research. And that was trying to get more rigorous qualitative research into the social sciences. And we talked about a lot of mid-range theory and grounded theory and adaptive theory, which is a newer one, which I sort of used in my thesis, which was developed by a professor named Derek Later. And he wanted to bridge adaptive and mid-range together in a more, I guess, more workable framework within social sciences, because he felt that the two of them were at odds, because one, grounded started off with saying that you should generate theory beforehand, before you go research, and then mid-range was, I believe, the opposite, where you collect your evidence and then theorize afterwards. I could have that backwards, but that's just what I remember. I do go into that in my thesis a little bit about the three of them, and how they influenced me. And that was a big part of our development. My supervisor, he was kind of the opinion that theory wasn't the most important part of academic research. So once I got to him, he had me focus more on the data collection and stuff like that. That was just his philosophy. You need to have it in there, of course, to satisfy the need to connect your research to and your findings to some kind of grounding and just logical thinking. That's the way that he put it to me. And so I just kind of went it from that. And his name was Odin. That's very Norwegian, I would thought always, but
That's true.
it's spelled differently than the traditional way, though. He actually helped me develop the topic more than anybody else. I had, as I stated, perhaps you read that I was had this big idea of doing sort of like a meta, why is it hard for women to get into politics kind of study, and it's just too big. That's like probably 20 master theses / doctoral dissertations to explain that why it's hard for women to get into politics. So he had the idea. We were just talking. He said, "Oh, you seem to like talking about political parties." I'm like, "Yeah, I find them really interesting." So then why don't we develop something along the lines of a political party and how women, interact with the structures of that, and how and then we kind of settle on candidacy and women winning elections and stuff like that. And then
Sorry, if I could just jump in again, right? Because I'm coming at it from having gone through this process and actually supervised some masters. Well, in the UK, they're called dissertations. But the point for people who haven't done a master's degree in social science, the purpose of writing a dissertation or a thesis degrees, what happens is, during the or taught the methods and the theories, and you take some specialization courses to become more familiar with the body of literature that in that topic area that you're getting your degree in. And then the point of the thesis or the dissertation is it's kind of like an apprenticeship. You are then of setting yourself a question, because that's what researchers do all the time. They have to determine what they're going to investigate academically. And then it's the first chance that you have to do, collect your own data, do your own analysis, and then draw conclusions from your own analysis. The role of a supervisor is, we have a sense, after having gone through it and published articles, of, given the word count you have and the skill set you have, what can a student reasonably put to themselves as a research question and succeed at answering, such that they demonstrate all of the competencies that they were taught over the course of their education. Right, so if you've gone through the degree scheme and you've absorbed it correctly, you should be able to do an independent piece of research that in theory could be submitted for peer review to be published, because that's kind of your apprenticeship, your job training. And so, yeah, the role of the supervisor isn't to give you tasks to do things or to hand you things and tell you what to do. They're there to help you understand the process of narrowing a question or looking for data or going through the whole process of what original researchers do every single day. So I just, again, since we were on the topic, I just wanted to jump in with that observation, because for people who haven't gone through the process, they don't really know what a master's degree entails. I thought it was a great opportunity to explain that. So anyway, yes, getting on to you actually doing your research.
Yeah, and I guess I can just add that was my experience. What you just described, that was basically the first year was the training, and we did like a reading list. They got us to gather some articles. We weren't required to use all of them later on, but I did use most of the ones that I had put on that list, and then we had to write a methodology paper, and then also a research field, they called it, and that had the path where you can go on to the thesis. And then once you get to the thesis, you're pretty much on your own, except for the guiding apprenticeship of your supervisor. I had two of them, mostly because the first one, Odin, he retired about I say 3/4 of the way through of when I was doing it, my thesis, and then so I just went to another woman named Linda, who was really helpful as well, just to help me finish it off. And I give both of them a lot of credit, for helping me get it, finished, because a lot of when people start a thesis or doctoral, a high percentage of them don't ever finish it. And I think they told us at the beginning, the professors who were overseeing the first year, that a lot of the people in this room probably won't finish their theses. And he said, it's our aim to try to get as many of you to finish as possible. And he said, I'm more concerned about getting it finished than making it like a perfect, groundbreaking paper or piece of research, as he put it. And so that was in my mind a lot of the time. So our group was like 25 people, I think. And if I remember correctly, I think maybe 10 finished at some point. Me, for example, I ran over a year and a half over what it should have been, because it's supposed to be a 2-year program, at least minimum. And then, as you know, you can get an extension sometimes if your supervisor is satisfied with the reason. I don't know if that's ever happened to you personally, if you had to go over the prescribed time to finish it, but a lot of the people that in my group had to have an extension. So I guess just getting back to how I generated the topic. Working with Odin, he had introduced me to a professor's work from Texas, a man named Richard Matlin, and he has done a lot of work on American, Norwegian, and Canadian politics from the perspective of women in politics, their candidacies in different ways, how incumbency affects it. He worked with another researcher by the name of Studdard, Donnelly Studdard, and they had focused a lot on the sacrificial lamb, that concept of women political parties put them out there as just cannon fodder and unwinnable districts, just for a show of force, if you want to put it like that.
Yeah, it's when parties want to up the number of women that they field overall in terms of candidates, so they can say, look, half of the women that we ran in the last election were women. But where they put the women to run, like if you can parachute people in as they can in the UK into a district, or if they recruit people, they're recruited in the women are disproportionately found in districts that are unwinnable.
Right.
So you get the positive accreditation for trying to get women involved in politics and go, oh, but they can't win. Or you put them in situations where they can't win. Yeah, so that's the sacrificial lamb theory.
And that's been, at least in their minds, they studied it particularly looking at the Canadian federal election of 1984, which is actually my starting point, which I'll get back to that later, I suppose. They looked at the 84 election because it was the first time that women had been, I believe, elected 10% of the total amount of candidates to the Parliament of Canada. And they tested the sacrificial lamb theory because the Progressive and Conservative Party of Canada, which won that election, which is now the Conservative Party of Canada, they had this is Brian Mulroney, if anybody knows who that is. This is when he became prime minister for the first time, and they had run a lot of women in Quebec as people were saying, oh, it's just sacrificial lambs. And the theory, a common notion was in that election is they had elected, I believe it was 23 female MPs in that election, and most of them were from Quebec, and because they thought it was just a fluke that they were meant just to be sacrificial lambs. But when the PCs won the election, they got elected just as a matter of course, because of Quebec shifted really forcefully to the Conservatives in that election. But what Stoddard and Matlin did is they looked, they simulated the election results of 1980, where the Liberals had won, and compared it, used those numbers with the results of in 84. And it turned out that the same number of females would have been elected anyway. And then they also they simulated it a couple other ways as well, and it came out that the results would have been the same anyway. So it was not the fact that it was just a stroke of luck that they had won. So in their minds, the sacrificial lamb theory, at least in that case, wasn't you couldn't say that they had just put them out there to be sacrificial lambs. Sorry.
So if I can just again expand on how we do this as social scientists. So that doesn't mean that sacrificial lamb theory is wrong. It's saying when you hypothesize that this could account for, like if you ran this in a different scenario, that you would get a different outcome if social lamb theory was at work, right? And that's what they tested with the data. They said, okay, let's go back to when the Liberals would have done better. I think that was, if I'm remembering correctly. And would the result have been different because of this controlling for the effect of this swing that happened in the 84 election. And because the results would have been the same, there's no difference that needs explanation. So because there's no difference between those two outcomes that requires explanation, sacrificial lamb theory doesn't tell us anything more about why women were elected in this case. A little bit different from, basically, if you look at it from a hard science point of view, you would probably throw more of the theory away. But because social phenomenon can be driven by various theories, we can test a theory, and the theory can not provide explanation for an observation, or in this case, there's nothing to observe that needs to be explained. But that doesn't necessarily say the theory doesn't explain something in a different situation. To kind of expand out the use of theories. So.
Yeah, sorry. I guess I didn't explain that as well as I would have liked, but I'm just going back to where I had written about that article. But yes, they had come to the conclusion that sacrificial lamb, at least in that one, just that one case, and that's the key point, is that one case of the '84 election. The Conservative Party had also stated ahead of time that they had expected to win 25 to 30 seats in Quebec anyway. So if they had expected to lose Quebec, then you could say that, okay, then they would probably put their be sacrificial lambs. And but based on the fact that they were very confident that they were going to win in Quebec, because at that time there was probably in Quebec. Quebec was about 80 seats now, I think. But back then in the 80s, it was probably 65. So they wanted, they think that they want about half the seats in Quebec. So that's one of the reasons why they point to that the Conservatives weren't just putting them out there as well. Even though there's a notion in political science that that right-wing parties don't try as hard as left-wing parties do to get women into office, or just advance women in general, because of ideology. And that's sort of what that influenced me as well. Like that's a big part of what I did. My work was looking at ideology inside of political parties. And Metlin and Stutter, their work was really big for me as well. I think the reason why my supervisor brought up Metlin was because he had worked at the University of Bergen for some time. Like, he was a professor there, and he had done work on Norway when he was there as well. And he also studied how political systems affect the possibility of women getting elected. So he looked at Norway and Canada, and how, like, multi-member districts, they produce more women, in his opinion, in his research, because Norway's had a proportional representation system for quite some time. Actually, I think they've always had it since they were independent from Denmark in 1905. And they have a really high percentage of female candidates, and they have a whole list of female prime ministers, including the one who's in power right now. So I kind of drew from 3 or 4 of his articles with Studler, and that sort of formed the core of the thesis. I kind of give the 2 of them the structural credit for how I designed it to to present the data and the variables and stuff like that. But this, if you want to call it, like, the abstract inspiration, comes more from the 4 authors from that course I took in 2007. They just their commitment to feminism and telling the history of it. And I sort of wanted to tell the history of Canadian feminism, the struggle for women's rights and stuff like that in Canada, as at the same time also looking at the different variables that affect women getting elected and getting to be candidates, because that's what I found. I couldn't find any research on anything past like 1994 as far as the amount of women getting elected, because Matlin and Stutter they covered 25 years, like 1970. I believe it was 7 to 1994 in the provincial level, and they looked at the different provinces in Canada, because like the different states in America, it's quite different when you go from different jurisdiction to different jurisdiction, because Quebec is the most pronounced one, because they've gone from, as I said before, they were really right-wing Catholic society pre-1960s, but now they're this really social, democratic, progressive part of Canada now.
Right. So before I'm just going to interrupt. You might be at a table where you're tapping it, because every so often I hear like a clunk.
That might be my I have restless leg syndrome, so that's what that is.
Right.
Sorry, I'll stop doing
Yeah,
that.
so I don't know. It's okay. Well, you can keep doing it. Just don't bump the table, because there's just this thunking going on in the background. And I'll cut all this out of the actual hangout. But yeah, so if you want, just wanted to let you know for audio quality when you listen to yourself on the playback. All right, so yeah, getting back to their Catholic being conservative thing. Pick it up again.
Yeah, so Quebec made a serious shift. It's known as the Quiet Revolution, and it mainly because you didn't hear much about it outside of Quebec itself, and it was just a slow transformation over maybe 15 or so years. I'm an expert on that. I just learned about it in school, and how they eventually the Catholic Church was, slowly froze out of Quebec political decisions altogether almost, and now we have Quebec as this really progressive, social change engine in Canada, because they do a lot of we have a national assisted dying law now since last summer, and they have had theirs for several years beforehand, and that's an example of like what I mean, how they've changed so much in the 45-50 years since the 60s. But so they look at the different provinces, and they found that my area, Eastern Canada, also known as Atlantic Canada, kind of lags behind the rest of Canada when it came to getting more women into the provincial legislatures. So I kind of found that interesting.
Yeah, so let's go through a little bit about the research itself, and if you could explain a bit on what are the theories about why women run and why women don't run, and whether investigations into what, at least for the Canadian data, what happens when women do run, can they win? So starting out, maybe just we can start from the beginning with theories about women's participation in running for office.
What page is that, sorry?
I'm sorry. I just want to know. I wasn't looking at any particular page. I just want to know. Like we talked about sacrificial lamb.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, just more generally. Yeah, just like some of the theories that you were introduced to. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just wing it. Just wing it.
So earlier I talked about there's this general notion that left wing parties are more receptive to women, just in general when it comes to any kind of political party function, like going from the administrative roles to the candidates to ministers and such. So there's a theory called the contagion of the left, and it's just called contagion theory. A lot of the times it's in different contexts, but I just want to get to where I have that written down here. So eventually what it was developed was back in the 1950s. Some researchers thought that right-wing parties had influenced left-wing parties, because right-wing parties had started using polling data and surveys and stuff like that before left-wing parties did. And then left-wing parties, in an effort to compete with them, had started doing that kind of research as well into finding out what voters want. Because polling, it started in the U.S. in like the 1930s with Pew. Like they are the originators of the poll, and they're still around to this day. So that was the first time it was introduced. Then it came along in the 60s that the left-wing version of contagion theory, which was that right-wing parties were going to had adopted the catch-all kind of politics, where you appeal to like literally everybody, not just the middle class and above, to compete with these socialist parties. And also they developed mass membership structures. The left wing, the socialist parties did, kind of like the whole union, workers of the world unite kind of view of political parties. But then it was developed into a feminist version, where they applied it to, okay, which spectrum is more of the political spectrum is more. Pardon me, I'm repeating myself. which political parties were the ones that were helping women the most, and they looked in, oh, it's left-wing socialist parties from the far left that were influencing the more centrist right-wing parties. So it would start in any given country where these smaller parties would nominate women, and then it would kind of, spread to the rest of them, and then overall the amount of women would increase. And when we look in Canada, because I guess that's what I'm an expert on, is there's the NDP, which is formerly known as the Cooperative, the Cooperative, so the CCF, I don't know the acronym at this moment in time, but they had started as a workers' party in the 1930s and then grew into the third party in our system to this day. And they have always been more progressive, and consequently they always have more women. And what Metland and Studdard found is that the NDP, as they increased their number of women in different contexts, the other two, the Liberals and the Conservatives, did as well. So that's why I pulled that out and used it in my theoretical framework, because I thought, okay, well, let's see if that continued on, as time went on, because they kind of stopped in like the mid 90s and didn't go further. And I just wanted to see if like the number of women working, if it was continuing to rise, and I drew a lot of questions out of their research.
I'm sorry if I could just jump in again here. So methodologically, what you're doing is you're taking a previous study and you're replicating it in that you're extending it with new time periods. So this is another, I'm just kind of explaining that this is a scientific method. This is, you're taking certain findings and the conclusions drawn on earlier data, you're adding new data and looking at the trends to see if the explanations still hold or something has changed over time. So again, this is a very scientific process that you're engaging in.
Yeah, it's just an empirical way of seeing if the Zarobal trend phenomenon had continued on past what I could find at the time. Now, that was back in 2008 and 7, so perhaps someone's done it subsequently. I don't know at this moment in time, but so I wanted to look at the federal level, because I felt like they had looked at the federal level somewhat like the 84 election, mostly just that one, and then they were focused more on the federal level. And then when that was pointed out to me by a supervisor that's what he had done on states and provinces, I thought, okay, well then I'll try to do it in a different way, in a different time period, to see if if I can produce somewhat of the same results. And towards the end of it, I kind of compare what I found and what they found, just to see the connection. Then another theory I used was called the model of the recruitment process, which is developed by Pippa Norris and Joni Lewandowski.
Lewandowski, yeah. Yeah,
yes.
I actually sponsored my British Academy postdoctoral fellowship.
So. Okay, so you know her, okay.
Yeah, well,
okay.
I mean, I'm not friends with her, but, yeah, we've had meetings and she knows my name and stuff, but, yeah.
Okay, great. Her. Okay, so then you're familiar with her work, I assume, maybe somewhat?
Yeah, it's seminal in British.
Yeah, yeah. They're, and I guess Pippa Norris is a big deal in American. I believe she's American, and Joni's, they kind of did it from anyway, so this was a book which I didn't end up buying for my own use later on, but it's so good. But it's from like 93, and it goes on and talks about there's 3 levels of recruitment in political parties. First one is the system level, I guess you could term it, which is like the political parties. Sorry, no, the electoral system, political culture, and party system, and legislative competition. So it's kind of the macro variables on women getting how political parties recruit into the where they draw their candidates from. So they talk about how the different first past the post, also known as single member plurality, the AMS single member, party list, alternative vote, AV, and there's a lot of different political systems in the world, and how they affect the women that get elected. And they also found, similar to what Maitland has found in Norway that, you know, the more proportional systems usually produce more women. There's some anomalies. Like they point out that Italy and Canada, which are kind of at the time were middle of the road in terms of they both had like 25% of their MPs were female, and Italy has a proportional system and Canada has a first past the post. So they kind of thought, you know, there's some odd that stands out from that general observation that, you know.
Yeah. Sorry, just to intervene again, because I kind of feel like I'm playing the role of the seminar host, you know, for everybody, for everyone else who's listening. But to restate kind of the obvious, you know, if women, you know, really wanted to be in office, why don't they just run for office? And one of the answers as to why we, as political scientists, and especially political scientists who use feminist critique, in other words, we're looking for sex differences and we're looking at gender roles and identity and the roles that those play in our politics, that one of the things we've observed is that the rates at which women participate vary by country.
Yes.
Now, that begs the question, what produces that variation, right? Because if it was an issue that women inherently, as essentialist theory saying, not running for office is essential to what women's character is when you're born female, you're just less likely to run for office because you're born female. That's essentialism thing, basically. But if that was the case, then we should see an equal distribution of women's participation at a pretty low rate, regardless of what the country is. Right, or something nearer that, but we see, you know, a couple points difference, or we see a rise at different times. So then the question becomes for us as social scientists, what is causing that change? What mechanisms are at work? And for people who study political institutions, one thing that you would look at is, does the kind of voting system a country devises create differences in the number of women running? And do some produce higher numbers of women? And do some produce lower numbers of women? And when we see that observation, you know, what amount of that variation can be explained by the system, the voting system in place, or maybe there are different attitudes in the country that can explain the variation. Or maybe so we can test lots of theories to explain the same observation and then see which theories explain the most, produce more robust results. And so this is, again, the process that you're kind of going through here that you're discussing is trying to connect the different systems of voting to the number of women we see getting elected.
Yeah, and I sort of, I guess my inspiration that comes from Dr. Norris and Dr. Lewandowski is that I took.
I actually think they're both professors, but it's okay.
Oh, are they not doctors? I'm sorry. Okay.
Well, they're doctors, but a higher level of doctor is professor.
Right. Okay.
So once you become like in German, you're called professor doctor, but in American and in British English, they're just called professors. So I mean, it's not a demotion or anything because they do hold doctorates.
No, I don't want to disrespect. They're very. I owe them a lot. But, so I drove from the first level of recruitment, which is the. I guess the political culture and the just the electoral system somewhat, because I looked at all of the different at the time there was 308 ridings, now there's 338 because we've had population growth in the intervening 7 years since I finished this. But then from the second level, which is the which I guess I'll introduce that now. There's the second level of recruitment is factors internal to any particular political party, like ideology and organization. So I drew on that from the ideology standpoint. And
sorry, can I stop you again? Just to explain. So within a country, within a voting system, then you have another institutional factor that could produce variations is the political parties themselves. So that the ways that the political parties decide how they put up their candidates might also influence the number of women who have the opportunity to run for office, which would then impact the number of women who could possibly win. and become elected. So again, it's a very systematic process of looking at institutional things at this level. We're not looking at social attitudes, of the general population. We're just looking at political institutions that humans have created and what variation in the outcomes we can observe. So, I mean, it's just, I know it's, for you, you understand it, but for people who haven't done political science, that's
I guess I'll try to.
I'm just.
We'll
if you don't mind, I mean, I've taught these. No. I've taught these in classrooms, so I don't mind explaining them again. But if I feel like something is an important concept that the average person wouldn't just get from understanding it,
yeah, that's important. That's
you're offering.
A tendency of mine to do that. I have to, realize people know what I'm talking about probably a lot of the times.
I taught classes and ran seminars where I knew it was going to be on the exam. So, because I was writing it, so there would be points I'd say, look, this is an important concept. Let's unpack this a little bit more. Hint, hint. This is something you should know about. It's core competency to pass this class. So I feel like that's the kind of role I'm playing is, like running the seminar and kind of highlighting the things that are definitely going to be on the test.
Yeah. I never had to teach political science, but I after I finished this, I went off and I kind of wanted to get out of academia for I don't know how long, so I decided to go do. I became an English teacher, second language teacher, and I went to different countries, and so I taught that, and then when I was in the military cadets, I taught that somewhat a little bit too, because we have this different, call them the Royal Cadets, and they have different. The different branches. Well, it's like Royal Canadian, but everything in Canada is like royal this, royal that. You're probably used to that because living in Britain, everything's royal that, right? But
yeah, that's true. But yeah, getting back to the differences in party structures in terms of how they approach and recruit and process women candidates.
So they talk a lot about positive discrimination, which if people don't know what that is. It's methods that or an organization can put in place to empower a group, a minority usually, to help them become kind of more equal at the playing level. And it's like affirmative action would be an example of positive discrimination in America. I'm sure people have heard of that before. It's controversial at times, but in political parties, what they would do in terms of positive discrimination is that they like quotas. Okay. And living in Norway, I got a lesson in that because I was involved in student politics, which is very robust in Norway. The students actually run the school in some respects. The university, they sit on the board, and their student parliament has a lot of power, and they also have control of the cafeterias and stuff like that in some respects. So there are gender quotas for like there has to be 2 women, 2 men, or however big the organization is. The board has to be equal gender balance, and some parties did that. There always a certain percentage. It's like 50, 20, 40. It depends on the I guess your ideology. Now, some parties don't like quotas or any kind of positive discrimination because that's socialist, social engineering or something like that, cultural Marxism, whatever term.
Right, so I guess I didn't mention it at the start, but my background in this topic is one, I was in the Women in Politics Specialist Group of the Political Studies Association of Britain, or the UK, sorry, not just Britain, it's the whole UK. And so I've sat through, since 2005, basically, until about 2010-11, when I started my own study, every Women in Politics presentation of 3 to 4 papers at 2 conferences a year. And the majority of research on women in politics in the UK is done on women's representation, or women elections or candidates, or your topic, basically, elites. And so I'm familiar with it. I taught also one lecture on different systems and how you can obtain representation, like quotas that we're talking about, methods of positive discrimination. And then also I reviewed a book by Sarah Childs. I don't know if you know her work at all, but she's pretty big in the UK with studying women in parties. And so because I reviewed her book, I learned about what the Labour Party did with the all-women shortlists, and also the difference is in the Conservative Party. So I might jump in a little bit with that, but yeah, so the positive discrimination, the idea of a quota is usually 50-50 is pretty high. Normally the quotas like a 30% women. So, and the idea is that quotas, so just in defense of quotas, that without a quota, there's no incentive to try to recruit women. But once you pick a number and you put that out there, considered by some people to be like a critical mass of women, that you need enough women in a political party, or you need enough women in a parliamentary body or an elected body to make a difference, to start changing the institution in a way that allows more women an easier time to access that path to power. So that's, and people, like you said, some people dislike quotas and it's social engineering and everything. Behind quota they are used. So just wanted to, again, throw that out there.
Yeah, I think one of your your nemesis is who you debated different times in a formal debate. I'm sure we know what we're talking at this point, but I'm sure that's what he would say probably. I imagine about this kind of stuff. But so, and then they go into how like social and green parties, or sorry, social democratic parties and green parties are more partial to direct intervention and recruitment. And there's kind of a context. A lot of, I've even seen right-wing parties have quotas for like the internal administrative positions, like the party president, party board, stuff like that. They put them in place to get more women in there. And but I've never seen a right-wing party actually use them in like candidate lists. Like even in Norway, I believe the parties there don't, the right-wing parties don't use them in Norway. And that could have changed because I haven't been for a while, but so it's not like the right-wing parties are completely averse to them. They're just averse to them outside of the party itself, in terms of they don't want to mess with the local officials who usually choose the candidate, at least in Canada, and I think coming on in Britain. But do they have something called a riding association where the local party machinery chooses the candidate, or is that, or the difference?
Yeah, they have interviews like at the candidate level in the constituencies, and or depending on how much control there is from the central offices, so that headquarters. But yeah, the general thing is it's the local constituency, like Conservative Party, will be given 5 names, and then they get to interview them and choose a candidate from the list.
There's a debate going on in Canada for a long time, and I get into this a little bit as well, that does the party, the national leadership of the party, do they have the right to parachute a candidate in if they feel like it's needed for star candidates, be it women. This is not just a gender element to this. There's also like the representation of minorities as well, and linguistic. Our politics is like really defined by language a lot in our country, mainly because of Quebec and the interplay of there was the referendums and all of that separation. That's largely died down, but there's still the Parti Québécois, and people don't know what that is. That's the separatist party, similar to Sinn Féin. Actually, there's a federal wing called the Bloc Québécois, which actually sits in the federal parliament. I know Sinn Féin doesn't really sit in the parliament usually at Westminster because they want to have Northern Ireland back with Ireland, but they've showed up in recently because of what's happened with dupe and all of that, and which is like their mortal enemy in a lot of ways. So parachuting is controversial. It's not done so much anymore. I remember one of the former leaders of Canada.
Yeah, in the UK, they've been moving increasingly toward local candidates, trying to find a local candidate to run, but people are still parachuted in.
Yeah, it's a practice all over the world in a lot of democracies where sometimes it alienates people. There was the last Liberal Prime Minister before the current one, Paul Martin. He did it a lot, and then he got a lot of flack for that from the party membership. and that may have contributed to his downfall somewhat. We can argue that. It's kind of a separate thing though, but I won't get into that. So, and
Back
then
on the theory.
Yeah, so they go through a lot of different political parties and how they use, different quotas in different countries. But they come to the conclusion that left-wing parties are usually more successful getting women in using positive discrimination, mainly because their membership is more amenable to it versus center or right-wing parties. And then then they go into party context as well. The type of organization a party uses. Most parties in the world use a closed nomination system, and not everywhere. In America, particularly, there's the open primaries, and the candidates are chosen through an actual election, where a lot of parties just they interview people and they choose one. Some in Canada have elections, like a very small. It's just the membership. Even when the party elects a new leader in Britain and Canada, it's just the membership of the party usually. Some parties, the Conservative Party in particular in Britain, actually can turf out a leader just by the executive committee. Like that's how Margaret Thatcher got power. A lot of people don't know that, but she was not elected by the party membership at large. She was just chosen from the higher echelon of the Conservative Party at the time, and then she went on to win her elections and everything. So that's kind of her story, the Iron Lady and all of that. Then they go into 4 types of classification of recruitment. I won't get into that because I didn't really use so much into that. Then there is the 3rd level of recruitment, which is the more individual factors like education, motivation of candidates, the attitudes of gatekeepers. This is kind of what you're saying before, Kristi, about when people say women don't want to run, kind of thing. They're not encouraged. It's something like having the resources to run, like money, because women get paid less, right? I know that's controversial with a lot of people probably going to watch this because, the wage gap's a myth, right? Like everybody says.
Sorry, just to expand on this a little bit more. So the idea here is that another barrier to women's participation, or basically women running for office, is, as you point out, in Canada, it wasn't until the 1940s that they were even allowed to. So men had already built up these networks. And politics is, there are sometimes newcomers, but politics is a lot of the same people because money gets passed down. And so these connections are made, these relationships are forged. And so if you are in politics, people in your family are more likely to run for office. Why? Because they can use your connections. But this was always restricted to men. So just because women got the opportunity didn't mean they, one, were accepted by the people who were already part of that networking process, but 2, they had to build those networks, or try to use family relationships to get into them. And that's why a lot of times you see women who do run for office are married to someone in office or the daughter of someone in office, because that is their way of making connections. Women from just outside in regular life who want to step up and run for office have to build all those things. And so this, again, is a barrier to getting more women candidates actually on the ballot. So just wanted to expand that out a bit.
Yeah. And just expand on what you said there about the generational sort of women coming in from if their fathers were previous leaders and all of that. Actually, Professor Norris and Professor Lewandowski, they talk about the female heads of state, like the originators, were all women that came from that kind of background. Indira Gandhi had a connection to, she's a daughter of Nehru, who was Gandhi's right-hand man and then leader of India for a long time. Recently in Korea, there was, she's kicked out of office now. Her name was Park Geun-hye, who was president. She was elected when I was living there. And her father had been president before her several, back in the 80s, I believe. Mm-hmm. And there's several other examples of women who rose to power, who had fathers who were leaders. I'm trying to think of some other ones.
Oh, Marie Le Pen.
Yeah. Although, but yes, that's a good example too. I'm thinking more people, women who are actually president of a country. But yeah, but there's like okay, Benazir Bhutto was prime minister of India, but when her father was before her. And there's a lot of other ones too. I guess I'll stop there.
Right.
But
so that's those are examples of that theory. You know,
yeah,
like what the theory is accounting for.
I guess it's ironic that a lot of the first female heads of state were from right-wing parties. That's like what I kind of was wanting to point out there. That even though left-wing parties seem to produce more candidates, right-wing parties, because of the, you know, nepotism, if you want to call it that, of family oligarchs, women got to be heads of state. Yeah. So
another theory that is used to account for that is because women are already associated with peace, you know, and like pacifism, and the left as well is associated with those things. For a woman to get elected, she has to overcome that female tendency, and so being the Iron Lady, being harder right wing, especially on issues of the military and nationalism, it sort of degenders her. She's not seen as like a mother nurturing. Now, this is more in the West. You know, I think India has its very own politics when it comes to the role of women. But at least, you know, like we think about the Iron Lady. You know, she was in some ways, she was the Iron Lady. You know, she was not the typical nurturing, soft type. And so that's another theory that's used to account for why we see women in positions of power, not elected to party level, like, you know, congressional or parliamentary levels, but in executives, they tend to they come more from the right.
Yeah, they feel like they kind of have to outman, you know, the men, you know, like to be accepted. And I guess Thatcher's kind of a prime example of that. I would go back even further to Queen Elizabeth I, who was a British history is something I like to read about a lot. I feel like it's my own history because of Canada was started by Britain in a lot of ways, and we kind of I feel like Canada mirrors Britain more than any of the other countries that were started, you know, by that culture, because the government is almost an exact mirror, because our House of Lords, which is just the Canadian Senate, is not elected as well, and they're appointed by the monarch, the prime minister. Actually, that's a fun thing. Monarch, all a monarch really is a person whose the decisions come down to. It's not a king or a queen. It can just be a president or prime minister is actually a monarch themselves. They're an elected monarch, but they are a monarch nonetheless. So we and we have the House of Commons too. I know Australia and New Zealand too, but like and we have Governor General, who's the Queen's representative, effectively the head of state in Canada, we just picked a new one actually, and it's a woman named Julie Payette. She's used to be one of our astronauts, actually, the second female astronaut Canada ever had. And so she's going to be taking over now from a man who's retiring. And she's not our first female governor general. We've had two beforehand. Actually, two of the last three have been women. So they've been women. Canadian women have been owning that position for the last 20 or so years now. So that's good, I think. So just to get back to the theory, so they talk about Norris and Lewandowski. They talk about a lot about the skills, the experience, and the convention was in that you have to serve a long apprenticeship to be viewed as credible candidates in those parliaments. A lot of people start at like the lower levels, like the cities and state legislatures, and then working their ways up. And they want you to have a activism background, party service. Party service is a big deal in Canada. And also trade union work. I guess if you're a socialist democratic party like the NDP in Canada, that's something that you want to have. But that's changed somewhat now. You don't need to be a party partisan to, you know, join up. The parties are looking now for more just skilled people, and not so much as hacks who have been around for a long time. I find that's better in terms of getting more qualified people, men or women, doesn't really matter. And you know, they talk about the personalization of the process, how there's like training schools now for female candidates to get them ready to run. I actually a couple of years ago in the 2015 election when Justin Trudeau won, I worked for a woman who was running for the NDP in the city I live in. She got second, which is we thought it was a win because the NDP is very weak in this part of Canada. So we beat the Conservative Party, so we thought that was great. So I learned a lot about party nominations when I was working for her, and she's still a friend of mine to this day. I kind of want to run for office at some point. I guess this is why I was so interested in this topic, is that I wanted to learn the inside of how it works. And I kind of came onto the woman part of it when I found out there's very few women, it's a very low percentage, like less than half of the population of women in Canada, which is something like 52% of the population. And that's why I wanted to do it, was to shed some light on it. So I think that's enough for the theories in the study. I can talk about the variables now, if you want me to, Kristi, a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I was going to say, yeah, you want to just explain a little bit. You're drawing on data that people had already analyzed, and then you were sort of taking the newest data and adding it on to that, right?
Right. So, so my dependent variable was just basically, the gender of the candidate, of the party who had won the most in any given riding. I kind of focused really heavily on each individual riding, and I basically went through and I guess that's methodology. I'll get into that later. But so the reason why looking at just the gender of the candidate from the party that won the most, sort of thinking that from the periods honestly, which is 1984 to 2008, party competitiveness. That's something you hear a lot about. Which is kind of the sacrificial lamb thing again, where parties put women usually where they know that they're going to lose. It's more of a just for show, like, oh look, we're nominating a lot of women, but they're not winning because they're putting them in ridings where they can't win. So I wanted to see if the parties were if they were putting women where they could win in a safe riding, if they weren't just putting them off to the side, even though that's largely been studied already, but I'm coming at it from a different angle. So I looked at all the electoral records from all the general elections from '84 to 2008, looking at all the ridings going forward. Now, some ridings didn't exist at the time when I first started this, so I kind of had to start from the point where they started and go from there. So I just control for that a little bit as well. Just making sure that that they were at least in 5 of the 8 elections that took place over that time frame. And I used a lot of data from the Hansard. We have that in Canada as well. And also Elections Canada, which is the agency that handles all of the elections in Canada, the organizations as well. And then that was the dependent variable. Moving on to the independent variable. So I had
and just to say, the dependent variable is the thing you think is driving change. It's okay. That's sorry. The thing that changes. Sorry. The dependent variable is a thing that's changing. It's the y, and the independent variables are the things that you think are causing the change. So if you change one independent variable, you should be able to explain an amount of variation, or you look for an association in this case, because your stuff was cross tabulation, right?
Yeah, I used SPSS, the commonly used social.
So you're basically looking at independent variables, and then you're distributing them. It's a cross tabulation, like when you see sex and party voted for. You're looking at does sex when you line up party voting, and then you look at the pattern by sex, do you see a difference that's big enough to be interesting? So,
yeah, is it significant or not significant? That's a terminology that we use a lot in the social sciences. Anybody's maybe read a peer-reviewed journal at any point in their life.
But a descriptive, but a crosstab shows you the pattern. It doesn't explain the pattern.
Yeah, causation is not correlation thing.
Right. So it's not you didn't do inferential statistics here. We're talking about what patterns do we see. So just again, when you're describing what you're seeing, so people don't think, oh, living in a city causes you to do this. Like, no, there's.
Yeah, that's not it doesn't completely confirm the validity of this. It's just, this is the data that was collected. This is what it says,
Right. So it's the first, it's an initial step. If you're going to try to do a causal explanation, the first thing you want to do is say, well, are there any differences? So you actually, you get the data out and you run these descriptive statistics across tabulation. You go, oh, here's a pattern. There's not a pattern. Here's differences. Here's not differences. And that's what you first look for. And then from that, you've got a theory that you're going to work with. And the next step would be to test that with inferential statistics, which we're not going to talk about today, but just to kind of, again, keep explaining to people what's going on here, the translation of, what you did with your data, and then the independent variables that you examined your dependent variables by in order to look for differences.
Right, precisely. And what I did was I kind of, I had looked at things that had been used previously in other studies, and things that had been discredited largely, like for example, Metland and Studdard had looked at the Catholicness, if you want to put it like that, of how it affected women getting elected, and they had found that's not a factor, at least not anymore. Back when they had done their study of the provinces in Canada, provincial women getting elected and nominated kind of thing. And they also had looked at labor force precipitation, like and then they had that had not been a factor either. So I kind of like left the issue of like religion and labor force participation alone, and I looked at like education, average income, educational attainment, which are things that are thought to have an effect on getting women elected. But I look at it from the point of view from each riding. Like, so in a riding with really high educational attainment, are there more women elected there? And one of high income, is there more women elected there, or a low income, etc. Like, that's basically what I wanted to do. So I kind of looked at those factors, but also like the parties. If the party had won the most in a certain riding over 25 years, does that help or not help? Does the gender of the candidate nominated in 2008, or if the party that won in 2008, I put that up against the gender of the candidate if the woman, if it had been a man or woman in that election versus who won, did that make a difference? Like the party. So, sorry, I'm explaining this very well, but I guess I'll just kind of maybe read what I have here. So the first variable was political ideology, and what I did was I simply look at the elections from '84 to 2008 and see if number one, had the number of women candidates increased over time. Number two, has the number of elected MPs increased over time? And three, did the Conservative Party or Liberal Party, which one had more female candidates and MPs over time? So it's essentially four things. And then I had two graphs showing it, the general trend, and then the two parties, basically, which was in green and then red and blue for the two parties, because the Liberals are red in Canada and the PCs are blue. So, or the Conservatives are blue. So, see, in Canada, it's switched. You have red states and blue states in America, right, but it's the opposite. Yeah. So anyway, so that's like basically the first half of the study was that first variable, because it was its own thing on its own, essentially.
Yeah, and what did you find? What were the associations that you observed?
Okay, yeah, just let me skip down to that because it's a different part of the area of the thing. Yeah, I had there's like 40 pages to separate my variables and my because I had a literature review between the two of them, which I probably did not need, honestly. I had to fill out a certain amount of pages. I'm sure you experienced that. They're like, oh, you have to write 100 pages, so you've got to fill it up with something besides, because research doesn't always fit into 100 pages. Eventually, I did hack this down to like 20 or so pages, put it in article form, but I never got it published. I got distracted by other things in life, I guess. But so all right. So the first thing, so candidates. I'll separate this into candidates and into elected MPs as well. So from 84 to 2008. So just let me get down to where it's written. Okay, so in the 84 election, there was 214 women nominated for all the parties. 27 were elected to parliament. The Labour Party had 44 women nominated, and okay, I won't go through it's too long to go through all of that. Probably, I'll just go to the general conclusions.
Yeah.
So
that sounds good.
Okay, so from 84 to 93, it went up every year, and 97 to 2000, the number of candidates decreased. In 2004, it increased over 2,000, but then in 2006, it went down again, a slightly decrease, and then in 2008, it went up dramatically over the 2006 election. So 93 was the highest year, with I believe it was 456 women nominated, and that's the highest that I studied. It was the highest at the time, because I'd have to look at the two elections since then and see if it's gone up past 456. Sure. Possibly. There's more writings now than there ever was, so that's quite possible. And then the Liberal Party seems to be very committed to women these days. Half the cabinet is a gender balanced cabinet, and Mr. Trudeau is very committed to women's feminism. He even says, "I am a feminist," which is kind of pisses people off a lot, on the internet.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think
like
you would that. Yeah. Yeah, he's very popular with the ladies, I know. Because not in the same way that his father was, because his father, was kind of a ladies' man, if you want to put it like that. He's
just so refreshing to see. Well, I mean, Theresa May has apparently says that she's a feminist, but it isn't that often that you get political leaders, saying I am a feminist. So it is in that way. It's refreshing. He and Obama had that in common.
All right. So for the two parties, for candidates, so the Labour Party had an increase from 84 to 97 without a break. However, and then from 2000 to 2006, it dropped off slightly, but in 2008 it recovered greatly over since 2000. So that was good. For the Conservative Party, it had beginning with 84 to 93, it had a continuing rise, and then in 93 it went down. It declined in 97, and then in 2004 as well. In 2006 and 2008, the increased slightly, and greatly in 2008. I think what happened with the Conservative Party is that in 2003, in 1993, they were the government, and then they lost very badly, the worst defeat in all of Canadian history, where they had 193 seats and they lost all but 2 of them. And the party itself was pretty much fractured, never the same. and there came a new party called the Reform Party, which is basically the western half of the party, from like basically Manitoba on to BC. That wing of the party became its own thing, and then there was from Ontario east as the Protestant Conservatives, and then that schism lasted until 2002 when they reformed, and then you can see that ever since they've reformed back to one party, their number of candidates has increased over what it was during the most in the 90s. So that's how I explain that. I don't want to like make it look like, oh, the Conservative Party, they just didn't nominate women, but it's because they literally had two halves of the party separated out. So I'm sort of talking about the Protestant Conservatives from 84 to 2002, and from then it's the Unified Conservative Party that we have today, which Stephen Harper was the leader of, and I Prime Minister of Canada for 9 years. So just there's kind of like that anomaly a little bit. But then the total number of women elected from both parties, the Liberals, it increased in every election from 84 to 2000, and then it dropped down in 2004, 2006, and then it went up in the, actually no, it went down in 2008 as well. So, but they were out of power in those elections when it declined, so that may be the explanation for that. And then for the Conservative Party, the number of women elected decreased between 93 to 2000, and then it went up from 2004 till 2008.
So, as we've been going for almost 90 minutes, if you want to maybe, so now we know what the results are, and I don't want to, push you too fast, but what were your sort of conclusions about this? Like, can you kind of wrap up, with the theory and the other structures that we talked about, and then these actual results and this variation? What were your concluding thoughts on this analysis that you conducted?
Okay, yeah, I guess I'll skip to the end. Okay, so what I found was, in general, left-wing parties, party ideology does affect the number of women that get, nominated and elected overall. So that notion I found exists in Canada even to this day. With the variables, I can just go through and tell you which ones I thought were significant and not significant. So starting with urban-rural, which is a kind of a thing that gets talked about a lot in this kind of research context. I found that in Canada, it does make a difference in the number of candidates that are female who get elected. It's about a 10% difference. No, sorry, 15% difference. And it's 13 points, and that's significant at the 0.1 level. What I'm talking about, just to tell everybody, is regression equations, where you take two numbers and put it into the computer program, and it gives you a percentage. It regresses back from what you the data you entered in, and I'm not really an expert on those, but that's so they can put it in simple terms.
It was a crosstab or a correlation or a regression?
I believe it's at first my supervisor said it was a regression, but then he starts talking about crosstab, so he kind of confused me from that point on. So I can tell you what I did, and maybe you can tell me what it was. Okay.
Yeah. So, tell me, does it have a gamma, a lambda, or something? Is it?
It's pi and Cramer's 5. That's the type of equation.
It's a crosstab then. Yeah. If you were looking at an adjusted, if you were looking at an adjusted R squared, then you'd be looking at a regression output. But if you're looking at that metric, that's a crosstab measure.
Yeah. So just briefly, what I did for all 8 variables is I took the 108 ridings, I pulled all the information for each variable out of the information, because there's very good profiles on each riding and the Statistics Canada's website, and every demographic you can think of. I put it into the machine. I said, compare the 308 the results from each variable against the main dependent variable, the gender of the candidate, and it gave me percentages of what I asked it. So the second one was what effect does the party that's won the seat the most in the 25 years has an effect on? Or sorry, no, just the party part. Just the party. So I found that I studied the four federal parties, the main ones, the Liberals, the Bloc Quebec, NDP, and Conservatives, and I found that there's a 10% point difference between the NDP and everybody else, and it's not significant. So.
Okay. Yeah, and so one thing you could do next then, if you were going to carry this forward, for instance, is you would take more independent variables, and you would put them into a model, and then you would look to see if there was, which variables did the best at explaining the variation.
Yeah.
So sometimes something looks like it doesn't have an effect because it's being picked up by a different pattern, but if you control for a few other things, then you see. So this is why we're talking first about what you just see in the data, and then you step it up to an inferential method where you can individually assign explanation.
Yeah, the party had an approximate significance of 0.271, which, and my understanding is pretty. You want to be as close to zero as possible. That's how it was explained to me back then. Like the closer the number is to zero, the more significant it is. And
right, so it's you're talking about the chi-squared.
Yeah, like the how they get when they talk about significance of a variable in the literature, they're referring to how close it is to zero in terms of the. Sorry, math's not my strong suit. That's probably why in social sciences.
Yeah, so I taught statistics. It's okay. So what a chi-square tells you in a crosstab or a statistical significance measure, it tells you the likelihood of you getting the result that you're observing. It would be not representative of what the actual population is. And so when something is p equals less than 0.001, what it's saying is that, look, if you draw from a population infinitely, eventually you're going to pick one that isn't representative because just by chance, right? So even think if you had a bag of Skittles and you reached in, and you would get, if you drew out 10 Skittles from the bag, or let's say 50 Skittles, it's a big bag of candy, all right? There's like 1,000 pieces of candy, and you reach in and you grab 100, and you look at the distribution. You're going to have some variation, but you're going to have, let's say, all of the colors represented in some percentage. But what are the chances of actually pulling out only the red ones? A handful of only red Skittles. Well, if you keep grabbing into that bag for infinity, eventually it's going to happen, right? So the possibility of you getting something that's just completely unrepresentative is always a possibility. And when a measure is statistically significant to 0.001, what that's saying is the chance of you looking at this distribution right here, whether there's no relationship or a very different, there's a big difference between them, is it would be a 1 in 1,000 draws out of the sample for you to get something that wasn't accurate. And so we're saying that we're highly confident that we can generalize from what I'm observing to the wider population. Now, it might be that there's no relationship and it's statistically significant. What you're saying is it's an accuracy, like how much confidence do we have in what we're observing? And so that's what you're looking at.
Yeah. I was surprised that the party didn't come out stronger than that, but like historically the NDP in Canada has, and it did show that they had they weren't the highest percentagely, but they were only actually the Bloc Quebec, but they're a social democratic party, at least because Quebec that's where they're from, so it kind of forms their policies on everything. So it was pretty close. They said the Conservative Party had like 18%, and everybody else had like close to 30%. So it does sort of point. There's a difference between the right-wing party, which we only have one in our city, and then 3 other ones which are left-wing or centrist.
Yeah. How about
So
if you were to do this with an inferential method, you could look at something like, well, not really time series analysis, but you could have like a lagged effect for incumbency,
mhm.
for instance. And so you might look at open seats versus, or, where people have more of an opportunity versus where there's some people who've been elected
Yeah,
previously or something like
and
that.
that was
So
the kind
those,
of detail I wanted to go into, but like, I don't know. My supervisor and I thought that was just too much for the setting.
yeah. That
With
would be way too much for what you
Yeah.
had to cover.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
I
try to speed
agree.
up here. I'll just go faster. Okay. So for education, um, I broke it down into four things: less than high school, post-secondary, and then people with grad degrees. So I found that in the two post-secondary categories, it was quite more likely that you know you would get a woman elected in a riding with more education.
Yep.
And the difference was 11 percentage points from the lowest to the highest. So okay, just to go through that, and that was weekly significant at the 0.7 level. So the party that won in 2008 variable versus the general candidate. Um, so of the parties that won in 2008, the NDP had the highest percentage of female candidates elected, and that was significant at the 0.6 level, weekly significant. Then the gender of the winning candidate in the 2008 election. So this is the candidate, the gender of the candidate that won without the party label on it. So I found that in 2008, a higher percentage of female candidates won versus male in writings. So it's clear that female candidates, when female candidates are placed in writings that are traditionally won by the party, the difference is 82 percentage points. So showing that women can win in election or where parties have historically won in the 25 years that we're here.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm just worried if people listening are, just going through the variable by variable, they're probably going to forget. So do you have more of a generalist summary that you could just give a big picture on rather than going through them variable by variable?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So so in general, what I found was sorry, I have to skip down to where my results are, the closing arguments.
Yeah, great.
So overall, the amount of candidates or female candidates, has increased in general. It did dip in the 90s, but it came back to pretty close to the original level in 93, where it hit the high, the historical high. There's a lot of turmoil in the 90s. I attribute to that with the Conservative Party and just in general in Canada, the referendum and all of that stuff in 95. The number of women elected has also increased since 1984. However, there was drops at certain points, as stated before. And when it comes to the different variables,
Yeah.
so I guess I ended this part out, right? This is the advantage of doing it like this. Okay, so sorry, I should mark this down better.
That's all right. I can edit this out. Actually, why don't you find that? I'm going to take a quick break.
Yeah, sure.
And be right back. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, all right. I'll just okay. So starting with urban and rural settings, what I found was urban settings in general help women get elected, but when you go into the bigger ridings with the heaviest populations, it doesn't make a profound greater effect. So small cities, big cities, same thing pretty much. Um, when it comes to the sorry. Okay, so comes to the party that won the districts historically. Um, the Liberal Party did nominate the most candidates, but it was not not the NEP that had the most female candidates. That was the Black Quebecois. In areas of high educational attainment, uh, the higher the education, the better. So with university degrees, advanced degrees, when those areas ridings have higher incidence of that helps a lot with women getting nominated and elected.
So you're saying if you're in a college town, you're more likely to have a female representative than if you live in a place where the nearest university is, pretty far away and no one in the people have
yeah. So that's basically what I mean by that. Yeah, sorry, I should probably elaborate on that a little bit. Okay, next. So in the 2008 election, it's clear that the Conservative Party had the highest number of female MPs, and the NDP had the highest number of candidates. Or sorry, the NDP had the highest percentage of female MPs. Not candidates, because that was before. Okay, when it comes to the gender of candidate selected by the party who has historically won the district, the vast majority of the cases where the party where the woman was female, it seems that it did help the woman get elected, if it was a safe seat or not. So what I mean is, by historically won is what they call safe seats, which are where the party has a history of winning that seat comfortably over the period in 45 years. So what I'm saying here is that women, if they're placed in safe seats, can win. That's what I mean by that. There's no difference between the probability that a woman candidate will be elected in a district with high or low frequency of winning. So if the party looks at a polling and they think that basically the probability of a candidate being a female, there's a little no difference when it comes to, so that's the sacrificial lamb thing again, where a party looks at, say, oh, we want to nominate a woman, so we'll put them in this district where we don't win hardly ever. So I didn't find any kind of difference between that. So you can say that again, that you can put a woman in a competitive seat and win. Okay, so average income, and that's the last one, I promise. So what I found was that the greater income of a district did not have a net effect on the woman getting elected. So if you're in a rich district or a poor district, it didn't really make a difference.
Okay.
And that's about it, because I've already gone and talked about Matlin, and I kind of compared what I found to theirs, and that's basically the end of it, and then the bibliography. So, do you have any questions, I guess?
No, I think we've gone over it pretty much in depth. So yeah, thanks for sharing that and coming on air and explaining it. It was a good opportunity to dive into some feminist theory concepts. People have told me often that, feminism can't be scientific. Like, well, you can take the theories and test them with a scientific method. So I don't really know what they mean when they say feminism isn't scientific. And, you've also taken theories developed to account for sex differences, which is what one aspect of feminist critique. and you were able to look at data and draw conclusions. So it's nice to see, you know, those things, an example of this, you know, that you can talk to and explain your relationship with, how you came to do it, and then in the end what you found.
Yeah, I enjoyed the opportunity because, you know, I watched your debate recently with, well, it was from last year, but you reposted it. I don't know, I didn't see it. I don't think I watched your channel at the time when that first happened, but
Okay.
your debate with Sargon, your formal debate,
Yeah.
just that was nice to see, because we don't, a lot of debates on the internet are not like what I call actual debates, because they're just like discussions where people throw opinions back and forth. When you actually had questions presented by your friend that has unfortunately passed away since then. My condolences about that, by the way. So I just want to, you know, say to everybody who's listening, you know, the social sciences have, you know, empirical methods that are used. It's not, I'm not just talking about feminism, I'm talking about everything, you know, history, political science, you know, economy, you know, everything. So it's becoming more all the time. It's increasingly, if you look at the history of social sciences, becoming more like, you know, the methods are more valid, and it is, you know, people should recognize that. And I know over my life, I've gotten a lot of flack for doing this, you know, oh, you can't get a good job with it, blah, 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 right? So kind of thing. So just to tell people everything about studying it, you know, it's, you can find a fruitful career and, you know, rewarding life experience by doing it.
And you understand your own society or other societies better. Like, why, you know, why when we look around do we see the number of women? Why is it different by country? You know, these are the questions that we investigate, and then we can give answers. And if you think that there should be more women in political spaces, which I do, because I think we haven't talked about like Pitkin and the concept of representation and the idea of substantive and descriptive representation. But then you can say, okay, these are the things that seem to work, or these are the conditions that seem optimal for women to try to run for office, because you can't win if you don't run. So the first step is, how do we get more women to run? You know, what would it take? And answering these questions will have an impact on our society.
There's this concept that was put forward in, I have to check it's one of the authors I used. I don't want to get the credit to the wrong person, but it's called the fetish for first. And simply what that is that they stated that society tends to pay attention to the first women who gets in a certain position, and then after that, it's sort of enough. And then they don't need to pay attention anymore. Like, oh, there's always been a woman prime minister. You know, it's the glass ceilings are broken kind of thing. So, but that's not the end of the story. Like, you know, there's still work to be done, and trying to make society understand that you know, 25% is that enough? Like, that's the question I would just pose to everybody. You know, is 25% female MPs in a country, is that enough? I mean, that's Canada, but, you know, I know in other countries there's more or less, but that's kind of the question that you have to put to any polity, you know, culture in any given country, and say to the population, you know, is that enough?
Yeah, actually, I've got a plan for an upcoming episode of This Week in Stupid Misogynist, but kind of a twist, where I look at, in this case, women, specifically women politicians, and the bills that they're introducing and the issues that they are addressing. And the link between having women in those positions to introduce legislation, having a lived experience like the people that they're writing the legislation for. Yeah, but so that's an idea for an upcoming episode. But yeah, Tim, thank you so much. It's, you know, it's been like doing a seminar again. It brings me back to my days of, you know, women in politics courses and teaching on stats and how to apply theory and things. So it's been really lovely to chat. Don't go anywhere, because I'm just going to wrap up the episode for the broadcast. Sure. But is there anything that, before we close it out, is there any other closing thoughts that you wanted to give?
Just, I guess if people want to read this, then I can give Kristi the actual edited version of it, the article form that I made a long time ago. I gave her the full thing. If you want either or, I can give it to her. She can distribute it to anybody who wants it. I know that she has, you know, 4 or 5,000.
A rough copy. I have a rough copy, right?
Yeah. I know. I assume her audience of 4 or 5,000 people is feminist mostly. I know there's probably some people that just watch it to troll. It seems to have a lot on that masochist tendency that we have on YouTube. It seems like, you know, I try to avoid that. Watch people that I know it's just make me angry. But I can provide that to her, and she can distribute it if anybody wants to get it from her. Or they can.
Yeah,
they
I
can
can put if you got it up like on a Dropbox or something, or a link to an online platform or something.
I'd have to put it. Yeah, I'll set it up. I don't have it like that. It was published to the library of the university in Bergen, but that's the only place it was ever put, as far as I know. They, like I said, I had read it for article submission, but I didn't get around to putting it out to anybody, and it's probably too late now because it's too old. I'd have to probably update it with the 2 elections since then. So
yeah, but there's just ways to get an online link to it. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I have a Twitter. I set up actually for this because I didn't have one before. I want to talk to Kristi, and she want to talk to me, whatever you want to put it. But it's like it's at italkyteacher. It's like I talk teacher. That's my handle. I'm the only person that ever wanted that one apparently. So I don't have like the real italkyteacher like Trump does, but. Yeah. So you can find me on there. I check it from time to time. I don't go on it a lot. I just have Facebook and LinkedIn, not Twitter. I'm not a social media person. I don't have a YouTube channel. I just have a video advertising my teaching services on the website italki. That's about it. So anyway, it was great to talk to you, Dr. Winters.
Yeah.
And I guess you can close the show out. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, then, to everybody who is watching, I want to thank you for your time and attention, staying with us all the way to the end. And all that's left to be said is that I've been Kristi. You have been awesome. Well done on you again for your social science nerdiness. And I will talk to you again very soon.